For 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, only a few months ago, the Department of State reported on the type of Egypt that would receive more American tax dollars under this bill. Quote, the government's respect for human rights remained poor and serious abuses continued in many areas. Quote, security forces killed a number of opposition voters and protesters. Quote, a systematic pattern of torture by the security forces existed. Quote, at least 7 persons died in custody at police stations or prisons, this on top of 120 such deaths in police custody from torture over the prior decade. You know, I think Secretary of State Rice was absolutely correct to speak out on democracy in Egypt earlier this year, and she was also correct when she said previously, quote, that for 60 years, it has been the policy of the United States and our allies to turn a blind eye to the absence of freedom in the Middle East. The only problem is that the commitment of this administration to democracy promotion is largely determined by its desperate attempt to find more excuses for its other foreign policy failures. And when it comes to Egypt, the Bush administration has merely changed that blind eye to a wink. Yes, just after President Mubarak last month extended emergency rule and dictatorial powers for himself, just after he locked up his electoral opponent, and just as his henchmen were beating people brutally on the streets of Cairo, Vice President Cheney winked and accorded Mubarak Jr. the prestige of a White House meeting. And the administration advises that President Bush dropped in to say hello to Mubarak Jr., but only briefly because he only wanted to convey his best wishes to Mubarak Sr. Well, the Mubarak strategy deserves more than that kind of wink toward democracy. His strategy has been from the very beginning to convince American leaders and American taxpayers to transfer their tax dollars to Egypt because he represents the only alternative to Islamic extremists. And to assure that his strategy continues to pay dividends, he aggressively suppresses any moderate opposition that emerges. It's true that he doesn't boil his opponents like Secretary Rumsfeld, former budget over in Uzbekistan, but to follow the sad path of civic discourse in Egypt is to watch an authoritarian respond to his people's demand for a more open society with a big stick, with the view that he can beat the spirit out of them with fear and intimidation. What we need in Egypt, as several people have said on both sides of this debate, what we need is a pragmatic policy, a policy that realizes if we continue to associate ourselves with a corrupt regime, eventually the pressure cooker will explode and we will have paid to create the very disaster that these dollars are allegedly designed to avoid. Now is the time to tell President Mubarak through this amendment that we've wasted more than enough money propping up tyranny. Ultimately, by approving the Obi, Lantos, Hyde, Green bipartisan amendment, this Congress can say to this latter-day Pharaoh, let your Egyptian people go. And doing that is the best way not only to help the people of Egypt, but to help American families be safer. Some have asked about a headline. I'll tell you what the headline will be if this amendment is not approved. The headline will be, we got away with it again. Clearly the Egyptian government has not heard the comments quietly in the past. They paid more attention to the winks they've gotten from this administration. The only thing they will understand is in dollars and cents and in the votes that are cast for this amendment. And I yield back to the sponsor of the amendment, Mr. Obi, if he has anything further to add on the amendment. He says he does not. I yield back and urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan amendment, principally because it will not only protect American tax dollars, it will lead to more safety for American families.